For years, Post Malone has been one of the most universally loved figures in all of music. The guy everybody roots for. The artist who went from hip-hop to country and somehow made the entire world fall in love with him even more. A man who opened up about hitting rock bottom with alcohol and clawing his way back to the light.
It was to a really, really, really rough point. And I couldn't get up off the floor for weeks.
But now, a photograph buried inside the newly released Epstein files has dragged Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian into the most toxic scandal on the planet.
Ladies and gentlemen, Post Malone's in the Epstein files.
What are we doing?
Can you believe it? Can you believe they put our boy Post Malone in the Epstein files?
Two women with their faces completely blacked out. A couch photo from 2018. Over 3 million pages of government documents. And somehow, our boy Posty is sitting right in the middle of all of it. Something about this whole situation is deeply, deeply bizarre. And we're about to break all of it down. A redacted photograph just ripped through the internet like a freight train, and the names attached to it are ones that absolutely nobody saw coming. Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian, two of the most recognizable faces in entertainment and social media, have just been dragged, completely without warning, into the single most explosive scandal of the modern era, the Epstein files. A photograph of the two of them, sitting on a couch with two women whose faces have been completely blacked out, has surfaced inside official government documents tied to convicted ex-offender Jeffrey Epstein. And the internet? The internet is in absolute shambles right now. People are panicking. People are speculating. People are pointing fingers and drawing conclusions before a single shred of actual evidence has been presented. This is chaos in its purest, most unfiltered form. And we are going to break down every single detail of what happened, why it happened, and what it actually means.
Ladies and gentlemen, Post Malone's in the Epstein files.
What are we doing?
Can you believe it? Can you believe they put our boy Post Malone in the Epstein files?
Now, before anyone starts launching conspiracy theories into the stratosphere or setting the comment section ablaze with hot takes and accusations, we need to slow all the way down and get the full story here. Because the truth behind this photograph, as is almost always the case with these kinds of situations, is far more bizarre, far more convoluted, and far more nuanced than any 30-second clip or screaming headline is ever going to capture. And that is precisely what we are about to lay out for you today. Every single layer, every single angle, every single piece of context that the algorithm doesn't want you to see. So let's go back to the very beginning, because if you are going to understand why this particular story has millions of people across the globe absolutely losing their collective minds, you first need to understand what these so-called Epstein files actually are, and just how massive, how unprecedented, and how earth-shattering this document dump truly was. CNN's own reporting laid it out in terms that are almost impossible to fully comprehend.
More than 3 million pages, 2,000 videos, and 180,000 images. CNN teams are carefully sifting through the largest, and what the Justice Department says is the last, batch of Jeffrey Epstein files.
Let that number sink in. 3 million pages. That is not a document release. That is an avalanche. On January 30th, 2026, the United States Department of Justice released this staggering trove of material, all of it connected to the sprawling investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted ex-offender, disgraced financier, and accused sex trafficker who died under circumstances that remained deeply suspicious back in August of 2019. This was the culmination of years upon years of relentless public pressure, exhaustive congressional hearings, tireless survivor advocacy, and ultimately the passage of actual legislation, specifically the Epstein Files Transparency Act, which was signed into law by President Trump on November 19, 2025. That act mandated that the DOJ publish all responsive documents by a set deadline, and after months of delays, heated political fights over redactions, and mounting frustration from lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, the floodgates were finally thrown wide open, And the material that came pouring through those gates included references to some of the most powerful human beings walking the face of the earth right now. We're talking about sitting presidents, former presidents, cabinet secretaries, billionaires, tech moguls. The list stretches on and on and on. But as CNN's own anchor was careful to note, and this is a point that cannot be stressed enough.
I should note that just because someone is mentioned in these documents does not mean that they've been accused of wrongdoing or did anything wrong. Many of these claims are unverified or they rely on secondhand information.
And that disclaimer, ladies and gentlemen, is going to become the single most important sentence in this entire story. Because what happened next to Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian is a masterclass in what happens when that disclaimer gets completely ignored by millions of people scrolling at the speed of outrage. Now here is where things take a turn that is critically important to understand. And honestly, kind of terrifying when you stop and think about the implications. The thing about a document release this massive, this sprawling, this all-encompassing in its scope is that it does not just contain smoking gun evidence and damning revelations. It contains absolutely everything. Every single scrap of paper that was ever collected during the investigation. Every photograph that was ever flagged, downloaded, or archived. Every email that was ever pulled into the system. Every social media post that was ever scraped from the internet as part of the discovery process. And that means that a significant number of people who have absolutely nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein's horrific crimes suddenly found their names, their photographs, and their entire lives splashed across documents that carry what might be the most toxic association in modern history.
Now, I don't think Post Malone wasn't in the Epstein files due to his own actions. I don't believe. Proven until, guilty.
And that brings us to the photograph at the center of this firestorm, buried within this incomprehensibly vast ocean of documents, specifically in a file cataloged under the identifier EFTA 016109293, was a single image. Just on one photograph out of 180,000 plus. But this one image would prove to be enough to send shockwaves rippling across every single social media platform on the planet. The photograph shows Post Malone, whose real name is Austin Richard Post, and Dan Bilzerian sitting together on a couch alongside two women. But here is the detail that immediately transformed this ordinary-looking picture into something that appeared profoundly sinister. The women's faces were completely blacked out, fully redacted, obscured behind thick black bars of censorship that made the image look like it was pulled straight from the evidence locker of a true crime investigation. And when you encounter a photograph like that sitting inside a folder marked Epstein files, your brain immediately, instinctively, goes to the very worst possible place. But hold on. Because the real story behind this photograph is absolutely not what the internet decided it was within the first 5 minutes.
Just because Post Malone's in the Epstein files doesn't mean there was any wrongdoing. Now, they got this photo of Post Malone from Dan Bilzerian's Instagram, Facebook post back from 2018.
That photograph is not new. It is not exclusive to the Epstein investigation. It was not taken at some clandestine gathering on a private island in the middle of the ocean. No. That photograph was originally posted by Dan Bilzerian himself on his own personal Facebook account all the way back in 2018. It was publicly visible to anyone and everyone with an internet connection. In the original completely unredacted version of that very same photo, the women are fully identifiable. And there is absolutely nothing whatsoever, to suggest that they were minors or connected in any fashion to Epstein's trafficking network. The context of the photograph appears entirely casual. Two guys who run in the same social circles hanging out. There are zero explicit ties to Epstein's criminal activities mentioned anywhere in the accompanying files or documentation. So the question that every single person on the internet immediately started asking was devastatingly simple. Why? Why on God's green earth was this random, publicly available, completely innocuous, 6-year-old social media photograph sitting inside the Epstein files? And the answer, as deeply frustrating as it might be, is that nobody truly knows for certain. The leading theory is that the photograph was one of many social media images that were scraped, essentially bulk downloaded, during the broad, sweeping discovery phase of the federal investigation. When you are conducting a federal probe of this magnitude, you cast the widest possible net, you pull in everything, and inevitably, you scoop up a massive amount of material that has absolutely zero connection to the actual criminal conduct under investigation. Now, you might reasonably think that the story ends right there. A random photo, a clerical quirk, an investigative footnote, case closed, everyone move on with your lives. But oh no, not even remotely close. Because we live in the age of social media, where context goes to die and outrage reigns supreme. And the moment that redacted photograph escaped into the wild, what followed was nothing short of pandemonium. Within mere hours of the files being made public, the photograph of Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian had spread to every conceivable corner of the internet. X was ablaze with takes, theories, and accusations. Reddit threads were multiplying faster than anyone could possibly keep up with. Instagram Reels and TikTok videos were being produced at an industrial scale, with creators slapping dramatic, ominous music over the redacted image and asking the question that hundreds of millions of eyeballs suddenly demanded an answer to. Why are Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian in the Epstein files?
Man, that's what it is, man. Well, I'm gonna get into some topics going on, man. So, Epstein files dropped, but they kind of didn't really drop. Like, it's kind of hard, you know.
And here is the fundamental problem with the internet in moments like this. It does not wait for answers. It does not pause for context. It has no patience for nuance or deliberation. The court of public opinion assembles itself instantaneously, and its verdict comes crashing down before the first piece of evidence is even presented. People saw a photograph with blacked-out faces in a folder labeled Epstein, and they drew exactly the conclusion that anyone would draw. But the reactions fractured into several distinct and revealing camps. First, there was the camp of pure, unadulterated shock. Social media platforms were saturated with posts from people expressing raw, unfiltered disbelief. Users were sharing the redacted and unredacted photos side by side, captioning them with observations like, "A photo of Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian with two redacted women, found in the Epstein files." The original unredacted photo was posted to Dan Bilzerian's Facebook account in 2018. The visual juxtaposition was genuinely jarring. On one side, a terrifying official government document. On the other, a casual party photo from someone's social media feed. And the chasm between those two realities is precisely where all of the chaos took up permanent residence. Then there were the defenders, and Post Malone's fans in particular came out absolutely swinging. On Reddit, a thread titled "Don't Believe What You See" went viral in a matter of hours, with the original poster writing in emphatic capital letters, "He is innocent." Recently, the Epstein files were released, and along with those, "This image you see." Defenders pointed out quite correctly that Post Malone, born in 1995, was far too young to have been involved in Epstein's activities, which primarily took place in the early 2000s. They hammered home the complete and total absence of any substantive link. No appearances on flight logs, no mentions in victim statements, no incriminating emails, absolutely nothing.
You know what's weird though is, okay, so they had that picture of Dan Bilzerian and Post Malone, right, from 2018?
Right.
And they blacked the girls out, but then people went and found the picture and he posted it.
Now, the person who had the most to say about all of this was, perhaps unsurprisingly, Dan Bilzerian himself. Because if there is one thing that Dan Bilzerian has never been accused of, it is being a shrinking violet. On February 3, 2026, Bilzerian took to X and addressed the entire situation with his trademark directness. He declared, "Every pic I posted on my IG is in the files with girls' faces blacked out." Let that statement truly marinate for a moment. According to Bilzerian, it was not just this one particular photograph that ended up in the Epstein files. It was every single picture he had ever posted on his Instagram account. Every last one, all of them sitting right there in the Epstein files. with every single woman's face carefully, systematically redacted. If that claim holds true, and given the absolutely staggering scope of the document dump, it is entirely plausible. Then what we are looking at is not evidence of some nefarious criminal conspiracy. What we are looking at is evidence of an investigative apparatus that vacuumed up publicly available social media content on an almost indiscriminate industrial scale.
It made it look like they were underage, but they weren't.
But look.
So it's like.
So okay, all right.
You know what I mean? It's just weird.
And right there lies the absolute crux of the problem. The redactions, designed to protect identities during the public release process, had the devastating, unintended consequence of making everything look exponentially more sinister than it actually was. When you black out a woman's face in a photograph sitting inside the Epstein files, you are essentially screaming to the world that there is something to hide, even when there isn't. Even when those women were consenting adults who willingly had their images posted on one of the most followed social media accounts on the entire internet. And this problem, the problem of redactions creating false impressions of guilt, is not limited to Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian. It extends to the very survivors the files are supposed to protect. One of those survivors, Jess Michaels, appeared on CNN and showed exactly what these files look like in practice. Pages upon pages of almost entirely blacked out text, with the only visible information being survivors' own names.
And then we've seen pages where they're blacked out and the only thing not blacked out was a survivor's name. It is such incompetence.
Think about the cruel irony of that for a moment. The survivors, the people these files are supposed to serve, are having their identities exposed. Meanwhile, the people who might actually bear responsibility remain shielded behind walls of black ink. As the survivors themselves stated in a joint letter, once again, survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed, while the men who abused us remain hidden and protected.
I don't like how when they release the files, you know, bro, releasing interviews with people without having any hard facts or evidence, and then you putting it out in the world, and people gonna take that as a fact.
Big Homie CC, speaking on Cam Capone's platform, drove this point home with a comparison that is hard to forget. He noted that when the FBI investigated Tupac Shakur's murder and opened up a public tip line, they received an absolutely staggering number of false confessions.
Right.
So this Epstein thing is really making a lot of people look really bad, man.
Bad, bro. Bad look.
The point could not be more relevant. When you open the floodgates of information without rigorous context and verification, what pours through is a toxic cocktail of fact, fiction, speculation, and outright fabrication. And the people whose names get swept up in that flood pay the price, regardless of their actual innocence. As for Post Malone himself, his response to the entire affair has been silence. Complete, absolute, unwavering radio silence. As of the most recent available updates, Post Malone has made no public comment whatsoever on the matter. And honestly, from a strategic standpoint, that silence makes a lot of sense. In volatile situations like this, sometimes the single worst thing you can possibly do is dignify a baseless, context-free association with a public response. Because responding, even to categorically deny, injects fresh oxygen into the story and hands the narrative back to the people who profit from outrage. So now that we have walked through the photograph in exhaustive detail, dissected the reactions, and examined the responses from the key players involved, it is time to zoom all the way out. Because the story of Post Malone and Dan Bilzerian appearing in the Epstein files is, in truth, merely the most visible tip of a much, much larger and more troubling iceberg. And that iceberg carries profound implications for how we think about celebrity, innocence, guilt, and the terrifying power of guilt by association in the age of algorithmic outrage.
It's an enormous trove of documents, and it includes references to some of the richest and most powerful people on the planet. That includes the current president, a former president, cabinet secretaries, a former prime minister, billionaires, and the list goes on and on and on.
Let us begin with an uncomfortable truth that is difficult to hear, but absolutely essential to understand. Being named in the Epstein files has become, for all practical intents and purposes, the equivalent of a career death sentence. And that horrifying reality holds true regardless of whether the person named has actually committed a single act of wrongdoing. The mere mention, the mere association, the mere proximity to Jeffrey Epstein's name inside an official government document is enough to trigger a devastating chain reaction that can systematically dismantle a person's reputation and permanently alter the trajectory of their public life. The reason is brutally simple. Jeffrey Epstein's name has become synonymous with the most abhorrent crimes imaginable: child trafficking, the systematic exploitation of minors, the blackmail of powerful individuals. And when your name materializes anywhere in the vicinity of that darkness, even if you are nothing more than a guy sitting on a couch in a photograph from a party 6 years ago, the general public does not pause to evaluate context or weigh evidence. The public perceives association. And in the court of public opinion, where trials last seconds and appeals do not exist, association is guilt. The examples are numerous and deeply sobering. Consider Peter Mandelson, the prominent UK politician who was appointed as Britain's ambassador to the United States in 2025, only to be swiftly removed from that position after the Epstein files revealed he had attended post-conviction lunches and maintained communications with Epstein. Consider the academics and economists whose professional reputations were left completely in tatters after emails surfaced, showing them seeking Epstein's personal advice. The pattern is grimly consistent. Name surfaces in files, public outrage detonates, career crumbles.
Well, it turns out, based on what we saw today, Musk is also Epstein files. Emails show that he tried coordinating multiple visits to Jeffrey Epstein's private island, and one from 2013.
And that's just Elon Musk, the richest man on the planet, getting caught in the same net. The very same man who, just last year, claimed in all caps on social media that Epstein tried to get me to go to his island and I refused, only for the files to reveal emails where Musk asked Epstein what night would be the wildest party on his island. If someone with that level of power and wealth can find their own words contradicted by the files, imagine what it does to someone like Post Malone, a musician with no billion-dollar legal team standing behind him, who happened to be in a photograph that was never even meant to be part of this story.
Now, who has Dan Bilzerian been attacking for the last few years?
Oh, Israel.
Now, you attacking this certain group. Epstein was clearly pro-Israel.
Big Homie CC raised another dimension that some commentators have explored, noting Bilzerian's vocal criticism of Israel in recent years, and pointing out that Epstein had well-documented connections to pro-Israel networks. Some have speculated whether the inclusion of Bilzerian's content could be more than coincidental. Now, to be absolutely clear, that is speculation. It is a theory, not established fact. But it is the kind of theory that gains traction in an environment where trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And speaking of trust in institutions, or the total absence thereof, the way the government has handled these files has done nothing to inspire confidence. The Deputy Attorney General stood at a podium and essentially told the public that there is nothing more to see here. But when an Epstein survivor held up the actual documents on live television and showed pages that were almost entirely blacked out, the contradiction was impossible to ignore.
Exactly. And so to stand on that podium and say, well, there's no names here, and to hear for months now, there's nothing in this, there's no reason.
That question, if there's nothing there, then what are you redacting? Is the question that haunts this entire saga. The FBI, after conducting an exhaustive review of Epstein's records, found scant evidence of a broader sex trafficking ring specifically designed to ensnare powerful men for blackmail purposes. And yet, despite releasing nearly 3.5 million pages, the DOJ still redacted or outright withheld approximately 200,000 pages, citing a range of legal privileges.
there's no way to hang yourself in that cell. He says, no way. And I thought to myself, he looked at me in my eye, he said, I was in the exact same cell.
Now, I want to pause here and address something deeply personal that Post Malone has shared publicly, because it adds an essential human dimension to this entire conversation. In a candid interview, Post Malone opened up about his harrowing struggle with alcohol addiction, a struggle that brought him to places so dark that it is difficult to hear without feeling something crack inside your chest.
It was to a really, really, really rough point. And I couldn't get up off the floor for weeks.
This is a human being who has walked through genuine darkness and emerged on the other side. A man who, by his own honest admission, was consuming vodka to the point where he physically could not get up off the floor for weeks on end. A man who credited the love and guidance of the people around him, particularly his girlfriend, with quite literally saving his life. He talked about how even people who cared about him deeply, like Justin Bieber, tried to reach him during his worst moments.
There was a time to where I had so much guidance and Justin was guiding me and Justin was like this. But I'm like, you know what? Like, I love you.
And now, through absolutely no fault or action of his own, this same man's name is being dragged through the most poisonous association in all of contemporary public discourse. Not because of anything he did, not because of any choice he made, but simply because a photograph he happened to be sitting in at a social gathering 6 years ago got vacuumed into a federal database and then spat back out into a world that devours context and gorges itself on outrage.
So they dropping these Epstein files at the same time where we just did this shit with Venezuela and the president. We about to bomb Iran right now.
Big Homie CC raised yet another angle that cannot be ignored: the timing. The files dropped at a moment when the geopolitical landscape was already on fire, leading some to speculate that the entire release was less about transparency and more about distraction. Whether you buy that theory or not, it speaks to the broader atmosphere of deep, corrosive distrust that surrounds everything about this case. So here is the bottom line. Stated as clearly and unambiguously as it can possibly be stated, neither Post Malone nor Dan Bilzerian is accused of any crimes in the Epstein documents. Their names do not appear on flight logs. They are not mentioned in victim statements. There are no emails, no financial transactions, no communications of any kind linking them to Epstein's activities. The photograph that ignited this entire firestorm was a publicly available social media post from 2018 that was apparently swept into the investigative database during the broad, indiscriminate discovery process, and then released to the public with redactions that made it look infinitely more damning than it ever was. The real story here is not about Post Malone. It is not about Dan Bilzerian. The real story is about a system that can hoover up millions upon millions of documents, dump them into the public domain with minimal context and maximal redaction, and then step back and let the merciless machinery of the internet do the rest. It is about how a well-intentioned campaign for transparency can inadvertently become a weapon that destroys the reputations of people who were never even suspected of wrongdoing. It is about the profound and terrifying gap between being mentioned in a government file and actually being guilty of a crime, and how that gap gets devoured whole by the insatiable appetite of social media outrage.
The Justice Department says tonight that its job is done.
We complied with the statute, we complied with the act, and there is no, we did not protect President Trump.
The DOJ says its job is done. The survivors say the job was done horrifically. The internet has already rendered its verdict on people who were never even on trial. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a beloved musician and a controversial influencer are left picking up the pieces of a reputation hit they never saw coming and certainly never deserved. The Epstein files are vitally important. Transparency is vitally important. Holding the powerful accountable is vitally important. But so is fairness, so is context, so is the fundamental presumption of innocence. And until we collectively figure out how to hold all of those values in balance, stories exactly like this one, where innocent names get caught in the crossfire of history's largest document dump, are going to keep happening. And that, more than any single photograph or any single name in any single file, is the real chaos.